February 9, 2023 meeting of the Charter Revision Commission to order. The meeting's been officially warned. I guess there's nobody here with us, but I'm going to understand the meeting's been officially warned. All right. Yeah. And the second item on the agenda is to review the minutes. Has everybody had a chance to review the minutes from the last meeting? Thank you to the clerk for putting those together. Maya?
I believe that Millicent Cooley was also in attendance, and as was John Parter.
I clarified on that. I asked about present versus speak, and so I said there's some missing names, and she said only if they speak, that they should be, obviously the camera swung around, so they know who's here, but I did ask to clarify, and she said only if they speak.
Because on the DRB, we note everybody who's in the room.
Sure. Do we have an opinion about that?
That's my preference, to include everybody who's in attendance.
Yeah, that's mine also.
Anybody disagree with that?
Can we also make sure then we help get everyone's name at the end?
Yeah.
Right. All right, so it sounds like we want to request that the minutes be amended to include Millicent Cooley and John Potter as having attended. Are there any other proposed amendments to the minutes? Hearing none. We have it ready for a motion.
I move that we approve the minutes of the January 19th, 2023.
As amended.
As amended, yes.
Thank you. There's a motion. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed or abstaining? That carries 7-0. Very nice. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to determine how we're going to proceed forward. Our first meeting having been primarily organizational, and our second meeting having been a presentation from the town attorney. So I put together, with assistance from Kate and Peter, thank you both, a little bit more detailed proposed process than what I had quickly jotted on the back of the envelope when we were last here. So probably it would make sense to walk through each of these items here and to see whether anybody's got any questions or additions or subtractions or any additional ideas for the things we might do going forward with the goal of getting to an end result. So the first one, 3A, was that we would start by learning the history and context of the current charter. Kate and Maya were just talking about that.
This is find charter.
All right, so Kate, why don't you tell us what we've done so far or not been able to do so far?
Yeah, and now Hannah's got a good idea, so hopefully we'll zip forward. There's actually, and Maya, and I know Patrick and Bob Fisher, we've been trying to search and actually find not only the charters themselves, which would be great, but the background information on when there was a charter change, what was changed and when it was changed, and is there any information that says why it was changed. And there were mysterious boxes that supposedly might have had stuff in them, and the boxes didn't have anything exciting in them. Historical Society has a little bit of stuff, but
They have some old charters, but they have no boxes of minutes, no list of who was on the previous commissions, nothing like that. So I think based on what you said, I think
Still crossing our fingers, I think
that they're still looking.
Yeah.
and the library has literally the file folders about this big. What we can do, because I know that they exist, is if we want to figure out some of the history of like the last charter or whatever, the changes that were made, we can always go back and look through the Brattleboro reformers. There was the 1988 people, there's an actual booklet, and it might give us some ideas of how we want to present this thing. they had a booklet where they outlined, here's what we want to change, so you could see, as opposed to, there was one year, or maybe it was even 84, I can't remember, where they literally they had an insert in the Brattleboro Reformer with like, here's our proposals for the charter, but they didn't outline what they were changing, they just gave the new charter. So it really depends on how in-depth we want to go and where we want to go, and because I think the Reformer could be a resource for us if we want to go back and get the information on the prior meetings. So if you think we want to do that, I'm happy to do something like that.
Yeah.
And then Hannah said she could find and go through the statutes and see if we can actually find like the
Previous charters.
Yeah, we know we can get our hands on the 1858 bylaws and constitution, and then there's a 1946 charter which we have a copy of. So it's just really bizarre, and it's the same thing with the history of representative town meeting as well. The best resource right now is Chris Grotke for Brattleboro did, sort of a narrative, which is on the brattleboro.org, this town's webpage under town meeting. And I had like what little notes I could put together from the town reports, but they didn't keep minutes of town meetings back then. So.
Would there be anything in the state legislative history from when it was sent to them for?
That was what I was looking for, but you can't get that information online because it's too far back, because I thought the same thing. So it would be, I don't know if we'd have to how we would find that out without taking a road trip. But if you could think of a way.
It might be the state law library might have stuff like that.
Oh, that's a good idea.
And the state law librarian is sometimes very helpful.
Oh, good, okay, that would be good.
It's housed at BLS now. And they're very helpful.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, because it's been really fascinating, and it sort of gave me the insight on what we should do, again, so that in 15 years, people aren't going, what the heck did those people do, and who were they? And
So for right now, I think that Patrick Marlowe and John Potter have succeeded in locating materials from the last charter revision, including some materials about why they were making the changes, and that's the charter we've been acting under. And then we have the 1984 charter, and those are the two major revisions, although there have been tweaks in the intermediate years. My understanding from the current charter is that it was 84 that they rewrote the charter to account for the change to representative town meeting.
Yeah.
So it'd be nice to see the full version of the charter from before 1984, to see the way in which the town government was operating before the representative town meeting changes. Those are the ones that I really want to see.
And I know we can get the 1946 version very easily at the library. So that's kind of helpful.
So the question will be whether there are real changes between 46 and 84.
Right. And right now, from what I've gathered, yeah, that's what we're gonna have to figure out.
So I guess the question as to that item, so that was the goal of item 3A, 1, and it really should be report and recommendations from prior charter amendments, because there's the prior, so it could be the last charter review and other charter amendments.
And I can go and get a copy of the 46 charter, and I wrote down everything that was in that file, because as it was photocopying it and us not caring. So I can go through and at least get what's in there. That might help, and then we can look.
And then Hannah's gonna look.
Yeah, because you might be the one that could actually
Yeah, I'll
find
see
this
what I
good
can find.
information.
Yeah, so when we find this stuff, maybe we could each get copies and then we could take a look.
And we'll ask the town manager's office also to continue the efforts to locate that material, determine what was the last full version before 1984. So we all have that information. That will give us a historical perspective.
Yeah.
Whether that needs to take up an entire meeting to discuss the changes and to make sure that we're all on the same page about those, or whether it can just be part of the meeting, that's one step. So any other comments or questions about looking at prior charter, versions of the charter? So then the next item is history of representative town meeting, and I think Kate has already touched on that some.
Yeah. It's very, do you want me to tell you what I know in like 2 seconds, or do you want to wait?
Sure. No, I think it's good, at least for now, to
Yeah.
put a little bit of perspective on it.
Prior to 1960 was the last year we had an actual, not a representative town meeting. And it started in 1953. There was who was at the time not a state senator, but Robert Gannett, who sort of was the one that propelled this, we need a representative town meeting. And it sort of came out of from where he was from in Massachusetts. That was the way they did it. And what's interesting about that, in the late 50s, a town committee was put together that included Bob Gannett and the town clerk and a couple other people who studied representative town meeting form of government and came up with a report. The report is nowhere to be found, so we don't know what was in that report. But we do know that in 1959, the legislature passed the enabling legislation, which is in our current charter. And then it went, town meeting, actually Brattleboro didn't vote on it until 1960. So we had the enabling legislation, and then it was voted on in the general town meeting in 1960. It passed 1,293 to 749. So it passed. And the first election of representative town meeting members was March 7th, 1961. And the first representative town meeting was March 18th, 1961. But there again, you know, the critical report that the committee did that talked about why we should have a representative town meeting in Brattleboro is nowhere to be found. It might be in a box somewhere. But, so that's like in a nutshell, you know, how we got where we got.
Computer.
In the looking that you've done into this so far, have you talked to the Historical Society?
Yes.
Okay, so we're sure they don't have a copy of that 1959 report.
We didn't ask them for that, but we're pretty sure they don't.
Yeah.
I will check back
Yeah,
and
yeah.
ask for the 1959 report.
And Chris actually did a lot of research. I was actually really impressed with the research that he did. And, you know, he couldn't find that report either. But that doesn't mean it's not stuffed somewhere, that nobody knows what it is. I mean, somebody might not even know what they have.
I haven't reread Chris's in a while, but I recall from when I did read it, it's in multiple parts,
It is.
it's very detailed, and he's, if I recall correctly, pretty clear about what he knows versus what he thinks.
Yes.
Based on, you know, what he discovered versus trying to kind of piece together the gaps.
Yeah.
So I think we could, if we can't find the 1959 report, I think at least reading Chris's summary would be useful
Yeah.
to us.
Or even if we can find the 59 report,
Read them
reading
both.
Chris's summary would be useful. So if we can
Absolutely.
make sure that that gets to the town manager's office in some form,
Yep.
so that it can be circulated, we have a chance to look at that as well.
Yep.
I mean, the prevailing notion is that the meeting was, we went to representative town meeting in order to avoid the meeting being stuffed by having people who were interested in a single issue overwhelming the meeting,
Yeah.
and instead having a cross-section of representatives.
Exactly, and it got, references in the Brattleboro Reformer were saying the meetings were getting unruly. And, you know, there was reference to one meeting having like 700 people in it, but, you know, so it was getting out of control. And people doing what David said.
So we'll hope to be able to get that information as well. So those are two historical pieces. I think we then transition over to looking at how the town interacts with the town plan. As to those first two, we'll gather information and see if we can get anybody to talk with us. Maybe Bob Boo can come and talk with us a little bit about the 1984 process. Maybe if some of these people are interested from the last charter revision, we can ask them to come to talk with us as well. Maybe those two are grouped appropriately together. The next two items have to do with the current, how the town plan as a whole, how the charter as a whole relates to the town plan, and then to other charters. So as to the item number, does anybody have anything else to say about representative town meeting inquiry? So then, I was hoping that maybe we could get the planning department here and ask Sue Fillion to come and talk with us and provide us her perspective about how the town plan interacts with the charter. Anybody else got any other ideas about that one? And then I know this has been one of the things that Peter has been interested in, talking about our charter in comparison with others. So maybe, Peter, if you have any ideas about how we would go about looking at that, you could share them.
So if it's okay with the rest of you, I'd be happy to just review. There's about 100 other charters in Vermont. Some of them are not that useful for us. Some of them are also not municipalities. Technically, they're municipalities under the state, but they're things like solid waste districts or other special purpose units. So there's probably several dozen that are potentially relevant to us. And I first wanted us to look at those mainly for the nuggets we might extract from them that where they've been empowered by the state to do something that looks like, we think it would be good for Brattleboro town government to be able to do, but we can't currently because we're not, it's not in our charter and it's not allowed by general state law. And I still want to do that. But as we've started our process and as I've started to look at some of those other charters, it's also clear to me that there's not really a standard format for charters in Vermont. There's quite a lot of different levels of detail and even organization of the charters, the different segments of the charters. So I'd be happy to just sort of undertake as a project, distilling that into something that I could bring for all of us to consider. I think it also would be useful to hear from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns at some point. So I think in that order probably, if you'd allow me several weeks to look at these charters and kind of bring together what seems useful for us, I'll put that into as efficient a format as I can, share it with all of you, and then we can talk about whether we want to hear from anybody else. I think we should hear from the league because of their perspective serving all the municipalities, both municipalities that don't have a charter at all and just operate under state law, and then the variety of different charters that do exist. And then there may be others that we ought to hear from as well, maybe from some of those particular communities once we know, what looks useful to us in their charters.
So that seems very useful too. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Anybody have anything else to offer or suggest about comparing charters? I am particularly interested in knowing why towns decide to exist under charter form of government or not at all, or without that form of government, because I hadn't realized that. Why do we have a charter when many other communities don't?
It can make our lives easier just to get rid of that.
Correct.
Most of the larger communities do have it, so it's, communities that have 3-person select boards and no staff and tend to be the ones that don't. Although that's something I'll be on the lookout for as I get more systematic about this is, are there any communities of 5 or 8 or 10,000 people who don't have a charter? I'd be surprised if I find one, but they might exist.
So that's sort of a background overview that we'll engage in to inform the work we're going to do going forward. Does anybody have anything else that they think that we should be looking into before we start focusing in on specific types of changes. Anything else that somebody wants to look into?
Well, I guess just to clarify, what level is this League of City and Towns? What, in the hierarchy, what sort of level are they?
So they are the association, they're located in Montpelier, but they're not a part of the state.
Okay.
They're an independent organization that supports municipal governments. So in many other states, they're called League of Cities. You may have heard in other states that reference. So here it's the Vermont League of Cities and Towns because we have so many towns.
Fair.
But it's a membership organization. It turns out in Vermont, which it was not true in the other two states where I worked, that every municipality participated. But in Vermont, every municipality is a member of the LCT.
And it's a resource organization, so
Yeah.
I'm moderator, and I went yesterday to the seminar that they give every year, town meeting tune-up. So if you need resources about employment issues, about any range of other issues that may impact towns, the LCT is there to provide assistance.
Yeah, I go to training every year for the Development Review Board, and they talk about land use and zoning, and
In addition
they're
to
very helpful.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm just saying they're very helpful.
Right, and in addition to the training on all different kinds of topics, they also, separate from the league in terms of the legal structure of the organization, but it's all sort of part of the same team of people. There's an insurance pool, two separate insurance pools, actually, one for liability coverage that, again, almost all, not all, but almost all of the municipalities participate in, and then one for employee benefits that is more, probably about half and half. Here in Brattleboro, we do participate in passive, which is the liability pool, but not in the employee benefit pool. We do that through private insurance through Richards.
Melissa?
Hi, thank you. I have a question about, so I attended the last meeting, and I believe you said one of the things you wanted to figure out was what is your approach to getting input, in involving other people. So I apologize if you covered that because I just arrived.
That's next on the agenda.
Oh, okay. I thought, okay.
Directly
great.
next.
Oh, thank you.
So the plan was to begin our work by trying to gather information in these 4 primary areas so that we're as informed as we can be about what charters do and what they look like and where our charter came from, and then to turn to gathering information about what we want to potentially do with ours. So if we're done with learning the history and context, Peter?
One last quick thing about the league, just so everybody sort of understands what they might bring. One part of the overall operation of the LCT also is that they have 2 people who are legislative advocates who actually spend this time of year totally immersed in what the legislature's up to. They're up at the State House every day. And then in the off season, they're working with, communicating to the legislative committees and working with municipalities around setting priorities for the next session. So their full-time work for these 2 folks is understanding state law and how it interfaces with municipal operations. And they are the 2 most knowledgeable people at the league around the various charters. So it'll be either one or both of them that I think, and I'm sure they'll be willing to come down and spend an evening with us at some point. And
That's the
one or
nugget I
both of them
was
would come.
listening for this whole time was even if they aren't a part of the state, government,
Right.
that they're supportive and off to the side as a membership,
Right.
but that they are linked closely enough to be able to speak to those points.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, they are the experts actually in the
Okay.
state in terms of that sort of broad swath of the variations from community to community and how that functions under state law. And one of them is her background was actually as a staff to the legislature. She was writing bills before she went over to the league and became an advocate for municipalities. So,
yeah.
yeah, good thorough knowledge.
So unless there's more to talk about in terms of our background work, and we can add anything in, remember, if anybody's got any ideas that come up, things you want to look into and be aware of as we're doing this work, just bring them up because this is going to be flexible as we proceed. So then we're talking about the process for gathering suggested charter changes. And there are 4 items that we've listed so far. We'll go through each one separately, but one is specific suggestions from the public. The second one is specific suggestions from members of Selectboard and Town's advisory boards, commissions, and committees. And then the third one is suggestions from town staff and the town attorney. So the town attorney already went through with us preliminarily a lot of things that he hoped to see worked on. But we'll ask him to marshal that in outline form and to present it so that we can then consider those. The rest of this we haven't yet proceeded through and talked about. So number 1 is getting suggestions from the public about things they'd like to see. And that being public outreach, I think it's the most important part of this project to make sure that everybody's fully enfranchised. So how we go about gathering that and soliciting that information seems to be a particularly important part of the work. So whatever thoughts we have now would be useful. Whatever thoughts develop over time would also be useful. Kate prepared press release to go along with this agenda. So there was, and thank you, Kate, for doing that. So the press release was in the Reformer and in the Commons. Maybe it was also on Brattleboro, but I don't look there anymore. And once in a while. And we're hoping to get more outreach to the public and then feedback. So that's one issue. Maya, go ahead.
I was thinking about how to get information or suggestions from the public in an organized kind of way, rather than just saying, come and talk to us about what you think ought to be changed. And maybe we could, as we get further into the subject matter, the sections of the charter is what I'm trying to say. We could set up a schedule of some kind where we discuss certain topics on a certain night, and we advertise that if you want to talk about RTM, come on this night. If you want to talk about, the whole referendum process, for example, come on this night. And just because we're having people from the town or boards come and talk about a specific area, doesn't mean the public can also comment on that night.
Peter, please.
I agree with all of that, and especially as it relates to when we are going sort of page by page and section by section and calling out like what part of it will we be considering next time. We want to definitely make sure that the public is well aware that's the part we're going to talk about next and has the opportunity to come in and participate in the discussion. I think in this section under this item B, gathering suggested charter changes, something more than just that I think is required, and I don't have a very specific recommendation to make about how we do that outreach, but I think it'll be useful to us when we start going section by section to have as close as possible to a universe of good ideas and other ideas, all ideas that have been submitted, so that as we're doing that section by section review, we already are aware of what people in the community and people who have engaged in town government think needs to be changed. For me, that would be helpful. I think it would be helpful to us as a group. And if we do go that direction, then I think this initial outreach to the community where we're asking for specific suggestions of what do people think needs to be changed, I think it's important that we ask for that in writing. And same thing for the different people. We've got a few different categories of people participating in town government. I think anybody who is going to suggest a change to us ought to suggest it in writing and not in legalese writing. We can work on those details later, but I think section H 4 needs to be changed because it's not working now. It can be better if we have it be this instead of that. You know, again, just sort of narrative and the person's opinion, but in writing so that we can, as Maya was saying, you know, give it some structure for how we're going to then go ahead and review it against what exists in the document.
I like that suggestion just for also accessibility, to make sure that everyone can get to this room, this table, this conversation, no matter what's going on. So I appreciate that for accessibility.
Yeah, good.
The other thing I was wondering is it possible to have a meeting that's partially on Zoom?
I was about to say the same thing.
Yeah, so that people who, I mean, it's rainy and nasty out, our last 2 meetings, and I think you might have limited people that are here. And
That definitely is possible, and I think we need to inquire of the town manager's office about getting some support,
yeah,
some, you know, a designated person who can be the engineer for that.
yeah,
And we can do that more than once. I mean,
Yeah.
we don't have to limit that to a single occasion. We just need to make sure we have the text set up and that it's publicized enough so that we know if there's interest. Any other thoughts or comments about, that was still general about gathering information from the public? Go ahead.
Just one thought on publicizing it. I think we need to do more than just press releases in the newspaper. I think we need to reach out to different social media platforms like Front Porch Forum and things like that to expand the reach of the publicity.
The other potential approach in soliciting suggestions from the public is to consider some sort of circular, inquiring, pointing out what's happening, whether it's mailed to voters or shared with voters in some way. Now, I'm not necessarily endorsing that idea, but there have been occasions in the past where information has been shared with, I think, all voters about various issues. It's gone to Supreme Court, actually, that it's okay. And, and it related to charter changes, actually. And so we might consider, once we're at a point where we've got enough data gathered, whether we want to circulate something to voters or property owners or everybody in town. I think it needs to go beyond representatives.
Totally agree with going beyond representatives, and I think even beyond voters, because there may be people who aren't registered voters but do have an interest in the governance, and of course ought to get registered at that point. But and that, if we did such a thing through the mail, I think is actually even easier, because you just send it to all addresses instead of actually having to sort for the voter list. And the town now has a monthly newsletter as well. So I think one thing we can probably lean on there, we have to talk to staff about it, but it doesn't serve the purpose you were just pointing to, David, of sort of something more robust. But along the way, as we just, you know, go through our process right here from the start, when we're going to be gathering background information, maybe provide in that monthly newsletter an update to the public each time.
Yeah, and I think Hannah, oh, I'm sorry, let me just.
Good. No, that's what we're doing. Some of us.
Didn't mean to blur. You know, Hannah's mentioning Front Porch Forum, and I think it's brainstorming what other, you know, like the library has a newsletter. You know, there are all those things out there that attract different people. So sort of doing something to everybody, but then, you know, like at specific other places that it can be. So we're sort of doing everything we can possibly do. And, you know, some of these things like the town newsletter or Front Porch Forum or Brattleboro or the library or whatever, those can be where we get out the, hey, we're having a meeting. You know what I mean? There's 2 different ways we can do this. So I think there's by doing it all ways, because we can't mail every voter every single time, but we can send them a big thing, and then any way we can hit things.
Well, to that, is it appropriate or not at the town meeting that is coming up to even give a plug
Absolutely.
an announcement to say, this is happening, eyes open, get plugged into the newsletter, or that's something, we don't know how we're gonna contact you, but you will have the opportunity and we want you. I don't know.
Oh, absolutely, we can make sure that happens. I'll be there. I'll be with you in 1 second, Millicent. Can somebody tell me about this so-called town newsletter?
Yeah.
Because I've never heard of it before, and it's news to me,
It's
so.
an electronic newsletter. You opt in through the website or,
I think it's monthly.
Yeah,
yeah, it's just monthly. It comes out the
Is that
first
right?
of the month, and it hits your inbox, and it's looking really
It
good.
has like
Better publicity would be useful.
Yeah.
It
I didn't
has
even know it exists.
links to like all of these meetings, the select board, ours was up there,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
Cool.
It's both schedule stuff and information about things that are going on, and I think we're gonna want it for both purposes.
So if you go to the town webpage,
Yeah, it's got this.
Oh,
it's
now
got
that I
the
know.
whole thing.
Yeah.
I didn't even know to look.
Right there
Yeah.
Well,
on
we
the
can,
front.
now we can do cross promotion. We can promote that there's a town newsletter and they can promote.
That's what I was
ours.
thinking. Millicent.
Yes, you mentioned having people give feedback on specific themes that you're addressing at a certain time. And I'm thinking that if you can announce what all those themes are in advance, it'll help people focus. If they don't know, they'll just give you the kitchen sink. But maybe you already planned on doing that. I'm not sure I heard that, but that was my suggestion.
That is later down in the agenda too, so at this stage of tonight's agenda, what we're doing is walking through various ways we're gonna gather input before we start even discussing various changes. So, and while we're discussing changes, so one of them was specific suggestions from the public. We've got a whole series of ideas for how to proceed with that. The next one was specific suggestions from members of select board, towns advisory boards, commissions, and committees. So I think we'll probably have a meeting or two to invite members of all the different boards and commissions to weigh in on whether they'd like to see any changes to the charter and the reasons why. And maybe those various boards, committees, and commissions can take the time beforehand to discuss that as agenda items in their own meetings,
Yeah.
so that what we're getting is the product not just of an individual's views, but of the board as a whole. Okay,
I want to go sort of back to what Millicent said for a second. And I don't know if this is what you meant, but if we know, like, we're gonna have 3 meetings, and we can announce to the public in advance, at meeting 1, we're gonna talk about this, meeting 2, we're gonna talk about this, meeting 3, we're gonna talk about
That's what it
this.
is, yeah.
Yeah, so we're not just sort of going, next meeting, we're, so they know what those 3 meetings are in advance, when they are in advance. I think that was our plan, but I just wanted to, I think that's what
Yeah.
Millicent was asking.
Right.
and then the third one was suggestions from town staff and town attorney.
Yeah.
So it is our plan to solicit from departments and staff and town attorney as well. And then the next broad item is to review and assess the charter's overall structure. So the meaning behind that item is the current structure is what it is, and it'd be useful. We had that overview last meeting from the town attorney, and when we start then talking about specific potential changes, whether we want to engage in broad structural change to the charter is a useful thing to consider. So I think we'll have a discussion of that item. Is there any further inquiry about that one?
I don't know if this is in the same vein, but, and it's not grammar, but it's like the format, because sometimes representative town meeting is capital RTM, and other places it's, not small, what is it, caps and whatever the opposite of big, you know what I mean? So I think we just have to keep track of just little things like that, because if we could come out with a charter that's
Yeah,
uniform.
I've noticed similar issues with, the way percentages are expressed
Yes.
and things like that. And I'm
Yeah.
happy to take the lead on that kind of stuff because I have experience as an editor and I notice those nitpicky details.
Yes, yes, yes.
Thank you. There was also the issue that was raised last time about various labels that are used, town meeting, and then representative town meeting, or whatever the other label is. And I think many of us found that confusing.
Yeah.
General town meeting, representative town meeting, in Article 2A and B. There must be a better way to express it, so that the charter is easier to read and understand. So then, considering the broad structural issues governed, impacted by the charter, I think what fell into that category was, most broadly, Bob saying last time, well, if you decide you want to change the form of government, you want to get rid of the town manager form of government, or you want to get rid of the representative town meeting. We did have a referendum about having a mayor.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, yes, we did, and we got over that one. So, but it seems like we want to at least put that on the table for people to have an opportunity to say they want to see the government run differently in a very broad way. And then we're talking about walking through each of the individual sections of the charter, to focus on each one and to make sure we're comfortable with the language in each one. Any questions about any of that? About proceeding through that? Peter?
This may actually be speaking to number 4. I'm sorry if I'm getting ahead of us, but I think it fits within each one of these different moments. I just want to be clear that when I was suggesting about getting comments in writing from the public and others, I think that's critically important when we're receiving suggestions. Change the charter so that it requires this instead of that, or it allows this instead of that. And I don't mean to be suggesting that we'd be creating a rigid process for receiving input. I think when we get beyond our, gathering things into our basket and then start actually sorting what's in the basket and working through this C, D, E, F process, I think we should be wide open to receiving verbal input from everybody who invests themselves in coming to our meetings.
I agree.
Totally. So then we're talking about next identifying, tracking, classifying, and working on individual edits. So we're hoping that we're going to have a whole wide range of proposed changes, and that we'll then plan on working through them after all this information has been gathered and proposed edits have been gathered, so we can work through them. Kate, go ahead.
And this might be a super premature conversation. And I realized as I'm saying this, I forgot to send you folks the YouTube video of the last charter review. And again, I think this is super premature, I set it on the table. When you watch this thing, when I send it, the Charter Review Commission didn't agree on stuff. Like, they were proposing things, and then they were each saying, well, I don't agree with it. I mean, it was interesting, and that's not to say we can't do that, but I think along the way, somewhere we have to figure out, because there wasn't a united, it was really interesting, there was not a united front when they were proposing the charter changes to town meeting, which was, I found really fascinating. So it wasn't a, we all agree on this. And I'm not saying we shouldn't agree, not, you know what I mean? I don't know where I'm saying, but I'm just putting it out there that it was actually quite fascinating to watch them argue against each other on the charter changes.
Do you recall the particular areas? I have some ideas, because I remember what happened the last time to a certain extent, but do you recall any specific areas that were particularly contentious or controversial?
Well, actually, there was one, and now I can't remember what it was, but Peter's dad and Bob Gannett agreed with Bob Gannett, who was the originator of this. And I can't remember what it was, but it was an interesting discussion on that. And it was also interesting too, because the select board played really a big role in, and again, they can do whatever they want, but it's their meeting. And they were actually arguing against some of the charter changes. So, and there was some of it was about how many people should be on the select board and the school board. I guess I was so fascinated, I can't even remember what they were arguing about. But it was so interesting to me that they were disagreeing with each other on things. but one of them was really, it was Peter's dad and Bob Gannett were one way, and Bob wasn't on the thing, he was in town meeting, so he got up. It was just, but I'll send it to you too, so you can see what I'm talking about. That wasn't helpful with specifics,
Peter,
but.
yeah.
I think we should strive to avoid that. I think we're off to a good start already. We're not taking votes on things except the minutes. We're talking about things and kind of everybody okay with this. And I think to the maximum degree that we can function that way and move forward by consensus, better off we're going to be. And if we bump into things where we do disagree, try to resolve them, together, so that when we have a report to offer to the community, it's a good, clear recommendation from us together out into the community. It's interesting. I wasn't in town at the time that was going on, and I don't recall talking with my dad about it, so I can only imagine, and we'll see when you send the video to us, how chaotic that would be. If you're a person in the community who's, kind of kept a little track of how we moved forward, but, you have a busy life, and we've been entrusted with this work, and so, they're sort of paying attention, but not necessarily deeply engaged, but they care, right? And then there comes the time when the community is going to decide whether or not the things we bring forward are the right changes to make. I can only imagine that it was just awful and chaotic for people in the community to receive these mixed messages because it was a bickering commission.
It was, because my dad was town moderator, and my mom was on the select board, and it was just real, and Peter's dad was on the charter revision committee. And it was, even the dynamic, again, between the select board, all of them getting involved, and it was just, and it created this, thing with the town meeting people, but, it was just, it's really, I agree, it should be avoided, because it was just, there was more activity going on, I felt, between the charter revision committee and the select board than really allowed town meeting to even, because somebody in town meeting would say something and then somebody in the select board would go, no, I don't like, it was just, and we, it was just, I'll send it to you because I found it fascinating.
I guess I would hope, if done well, of trying to push to the public and push to the committees and everything, and say where we are along the way. If we do that well, it will be top of mind for busy folks. It won't end up being at the one big meeting that everyone's, going to bat for their item, right? So hopefully it is standing on their shoulders, learning those lessons once and not twice.
My recollection is that one of the themes of the last charter revision process was this notion of the need for checks and balances that Bob Fisher referred to briefly when he was here before. And so there was a lot of discussion the last time about what was the number of people whose signatures needed to be gathered in order to have various action taken. And it wound up resulting, like I said at the last meeting, in the very first substantive item in this charter being, with a certain number of signatures, you can put an item on the town meeting warning that has nothing to do with town business. And it was that type of discussion that unfolded throughout the process. I mean, a big issue the last time was whether voting should be by voice or by raising hands or needing people to stand up. And so it was determined that accountability to the voters required that you stand up every time you're going to vote at town meeting. So at town meeting, when we're in person, to take any vote, everybody has to stand up. Can't take a plain voice vote. Everybody's got to rise. And it was supposed to be for accountability, and that was a theme that sort of ran through that entire process. I don't want to negatively characterize it, but
Sure.
I think that it created some concerns about what was being accomplished.
Yeah.
Of course,
So,
it's nice to stand up once in a
Get
while.
Yep. Many times over the course of the day. So we'll work on the individual sections, and then we'll identify, track, and classify, and work on individual edits. as we've collated those and gathered them. So, any more comments about any of that?
Can I just ask a question,
Yeah.
sort of procedurally, do we have an editable copy of the charter available to us?
I'm sure we can make sure we get them.
It would be helpful to be able to get a
We'll,
copy that we can.
we'll get that
You don't
done.
want to type it all over again?
Somebody may need to.
No.
I think it exists already in a Word document, but I don't know for sure. So if not, I'm sure we can get it typed.
We can get it,
Yeah.
scanned in and
Yeah.
from PDF to Word and then.
If it
have
already
somebody
exists,
prove
that
it.
would be
Of course.
easier.
Yeah.
We won't ask you to do that. No, the staff will take care of that. So then there's the last two broad questions, which are how to encourage, gather, and review public input on the charter revision process. I put that as a separate item here, but we've talked about all those items throughout. If anybody's got any other suggestions for how to go about doing that, it'd be great to have. So far, we've had 3 meetings, and we've had 3 or 4 people attend each one. And we'd like to make sure that as many people as possible engage.
Yeah, I just think we have to keep reminding people that we exist. It's still so early.
Mhm.
If we just keep doing it, I think that helps.
And no particular agenda has developed yet in terms of what people are,
Okay.
anybody wants to try to accomplish. And that did exist last time. I don't know if it started that way or not. All right, and then the last one was meeting schedule and anticipated length of project. And Peter was correct that anticipated length of project is not something that we can even remotely begin to conceive of right now, because we don't know how broadly this is gonna
Jumping in
unfold.
with a comment, just
Go ahead,
on,
please.
on number 4.
Hmm?
I don't think anything should be submitted anonymously because of wanting to engage the process. However, I'm already talking myself out of like anything that I might say, right? Of like, is there a box where a letter could be dropped in because they're on their way to work? Or is there a Google form that somebody could fill out so that way when they have a downtime during the workday or whatever, and hit folks in a different way? Is there a email inbox that is just for a town commission charter? I'm talking myself out of all of these things with, what could come up as a hiccup, but as thinking about the different ways that folks, because I'm also cautious about some of the social media ways, because then that spins out in a conversation that's not controlled. However, again, talk myself out of it, it doesn't have to be controlled. But if it's not grabbed, but somebody put their heart and soul into this social media post, I don't want to miss that either.
There is a box. I mean, a
Perfect.
general town box where you can pay your bills and whatever. So people could drop off an envelope that says for the charter commission.
Sure.
We should tell folks that they can.
Yeah.
Invite them to do that if that's one of the ways we want to invite input. I like the idea of a form.
Me too.
If we don't require people to use a form, but we make one available, it may be useful to some people to have some structure. Where
And
they're
maybe we
responsive to it.
could ask the town to set up an email. I mean,
It could have an autoresponder that says it's not maintained, you cannot expect a response, but, you've at least submitted something.
yeah,
There are forms, a variety of different forms that town staff has created so it's not an email box, but it's an electronic submittal. I think that might be, that would address
Yeah, okay.
that
That
desire,
would be-
but in a
yeah.
way that doesn't create confusion out of it being an actual email address.
Yes.
yeah, that's a good idea.
And then if it's then in the places where it's in print, or it's, it's like, you can just keep drawing back to, if you're already talking digitally, go here. You're already talking digitally, go here. Like, to redirect folks in a constructive way.
And when we're partway through this process, maybe we will try to do a mailing. Or 2 through the process, and that's a good way to try to solicit as broadly as possible input and give people opportunity to submit comments back digitally or in writing, on paper.
David, on our collective behalf, will you be following up with town staff about the variety of things we've kind of flagged as being things we're going to need from them?
I've listed out a whole series of things, and I will begin working with town manager's office to try to schedule this out. I'm not sure when our next meeting should be, given that if we're gonna start by gathering information from these various sources, it needs to be gathered before we really sit down to meet. So it may be, what is it now, February 9th, it may be that, we try to meet sometime once before town meeting, in the third or fourth week in March, to begin that process after we've gathered up all that information. And I may not try now even to get a date, but rather just try to get some general agreement that that's the time frame. So when we're talking meeting schedule, we did set the first meeting through Jessica Stickler, and then we picked 2 dates out when we were at that meeting, but my preliminary view is that until we've got more of a schedule, it doesn't make sense right now to set the next meeting, but rather we might wanna, and I might wanna, start mapping out with town staff proposed sort of time frame and structure for when we're going to address these, and drop it into the calendar just in general time frames, and then bring that back to the commission as a whole with this input that we've just gathered tonight, and then be talking with them about the other ways that we're planning to do outreach and gather information back.
Partially as well for like the Zoom, in case somebody needs scheduled to join us.
Right. Go ahead, Ann.
And this might be a little cryptic, but I think once we get into those more substantive conversations, it would be helpful to have the meetings on sort of like a regular schedule, because that might encourage public participation if people don't have to research when each meeting is.
Yep. But for right now, I think that,
For now, I think we're still sort of in these early stages, figuring things out, but once we get into that stage, I think sort of saying, you know, it's this day of every month or twice a month or whatever we agree upon would be helpful to encourage public participation.
and it's not clear, is it clear to anybody whether we would want to meet twice a month or once a month? Or it's just it's premature right now even to talk about it?
I think it's premature.
I think it's a little early to say, but I also worry too how long that it will be. Already potentially
Right.
the length then on my mind, but.
Good, Peter.
I have an opinion about that length, less of an opinion about the meeting schedule. I'm happy to do a couple of times a month. I'm also happy to just do monthly. I might be the person at the table who has the most open schedule at this point, so whatever's going to work for the rest of you, I think is probably going to work for me. But I think it's really important that we not even arbitrarily, but not establish an expectation for ourselves or for the community around anything that resembles a deadline. Because even once we've gotten into the work and we kind of feel like we've got that foundation under us about the history and the context, and we're moving on into specific issues, we don't know where we might hit a tangent that's really worth spending some time with. And so I think it's just, it may be that it takes many months to do this instead of just a handful of months, and I think that's just fine if that's, we can decide together as we work through the work what it's going to require and what's worth bogging down in, if you will, but and what maybe doesn't need lengthy consideration. But I would just whatever schedule we keep, however fast our pace is, or just not to until pretty near the end set an expectation of when we'll be finished.
And I think that's what Selectboard is also expecting from us, that we're gonna make the determination of how we wanna proceed and what work we need to do and how long it's gonna take and what form it's gonna ultimately take as well. So I think that that's totally appropriate. On the other hand, Kate did point out that the last process may have dragged on for years. And I'm not getting the sense preliminarily that we're still going to be doing this in 2025.
Right. But
Just
might
put that
well
on the
still be
table.
doing it in 2024.
Could be, could be, hope not,
We'll
could
see.
be, yep. Anybody else have anything else to say about meeting schedule and anticipated length of project?
Now, did you say you were thinking we should meet once before town meeting?
Right, I think that's, and so what I'm gonna try to do is hope that everybody who's gathering information about, the prior charters and the, amendments that have unfolded and the history of representative town meeting, if we could try to have gathered that up within 2 or 3 weeks so that we can circulate it, we can digest it, and then hopefully have a meeting. There's gonna be the informational meetings. There's actually more informational meetings this year than in the past because there's a bond issue that's having a separate informational meeting. So there's gonna be a couple of informational meetings, and then there's gonna be town meeting, and it might be useful sometime in the second week of March. So we might not have a meeting until then, but if we can gather everything together and then start developing that perspective, that would be my initial time frame. And at the same time, we'll begin planning towards items A, 3, and 4, which is getting the planning department and in here, and then Peter beginning to look at his project and trying to get VLCT in here. And whether we get VLCT in before or after your work is something for you to think about as well.
Yeah.
I heard you say earlier, after.
I think it'd probably be useful also for their schedule because the two people who are
Right, very busy.
the right ones to come are going to be very busy until early May.
Yep.
With the legislative session.
Cool. Maya?
I'll be seeing Sue on Monday, if you want me to chat with her.
Thank you, that'd be great, yeah. And begin, if she can start thinking about all that. And, we have somebody from the town clerk's office here today, thanks for coming. And same thing, a lot of the issues that arose when we were talking with Bob a couple of weeks ago had to do with elections. And so whatever town clerk's office and all the staff think about that will be really useful to have. We'll also need to know from town attorney and whether we need to include things about school district in the charter, because it used to be a part of the town government and part of the same meeting, but it's not anymore.
Can I ask one more thing?
Yeah,
I want to
go
go
ahead,
back to
please.
Vermont League of Cities and Towns, I'm zooming back. And I'm not saying this because I think this should drive what we do, but would they track, legislation? Can they tell us what charter changes failed, like got to the legislature but didn't?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And again, we shouldn't not do something because it failed once.
Right.
But it would just be helpful to have some context.
Yeah.
And obviously, it depends on who the legislature is and the governor is, so it's something that failed 10 years ago could
Yeah.
pass now, and
Yeah.
vice versa.
And it sometimes can be pretty arbitrary
Yes.
too. We can get into it deeper when we get into it, but just because a particular community got rejected on something at a particular time doesn't mean that another community is going to get rejected on it, even if it's pretty soon after that, because sometimes the dynamic between the different communities and the legislature is affected by other things going on in those communities. And I'm sorry, I'm being really vague. There was recently, for one community in Vermont, a change that seemed completely innocuous. It was not controversial. It was not, innovative. It was just addressing, they had an issue where a select board member had stopped coming to meetings and they didn't have any way to remove that person from being on the select board. And so they created wording that would allow them to take action in a situation like that and send it up to Montpelier. And it inexplicably got rejected. But it had to do more with concerns among some of the legislators about other governance issues in that community and didn't have to do with whether or not that actual language made sense.
Okay.
I think you're getting ready to close. For the benefit of the public now and also for the next Charter Review Commission, can the material that you accumulate and then also distribute amongst yourselves, can that be posted to the website?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't think you even have a website section now.
There is already within the town's website, if you go to the boards and commissions and then it's other commissions, because it's
Okay.
of this one being new, but then within that, I think like the third or fourth one is Charter Revision Commission. When you click on that, that's where all this information is gonna get presented. It is a couple of steps. And, but,
Website stinks.
pardon?
Website stinks.
Yes, it does still, but I know that there's a big project underway, and the folks who have created this wonderful newsletter are also working on creating a better website.
Cool.
Thank
Is
you.
there any other input or comment tonight? Well, then it looks like we're ready for a motion to adjourn, and we'll be working to get our next meeting scheduled after historical data is gathered. We're adjourning? Okay, very nice. Thanks, everybody.